Hey guys, so in this one, we are going to go over some synths from Nosedive from deadmau5. I kind of recreated this little section that leads up into the break. So many people have been asking me to work on this, and I think I got fairly close, but the more I listen to it, the more I just feel like this sounds terrible. So you guys can let me know. And this will be probably a longer video because so many people have been asking me about this. So I'm going to try and go over all the synths that I went through. And a few of these, again, are not exactly on. I kind of struggled with the higher lead, and then I don't have the patch for like the choir and the break. That's an Omnisphere patch, and I just don't have that. So I try to recreate that with just some stock choir stuff in Ableton. But I won't play the original because then you guys would be listening to like 4 minutes of music. So most of you already know this song, so I will just play what I have, and then we can start diving into how I created these sounds. So yeah, that is where I got to. I should probably try and recreate the actual like drop of the song at some point. But we have a few different things going on here. We have this like lower lead, and then the higher lead that comes in with it. We have these like synth stabs that sound kind of like brass hits. Then we have these bass notes that come in, 16th notes, and then there's also that higher little bass hit that comes in and out and it's delayed and kind of hits you in the high end. And then the break section is just these chords. And then we have another lead over the top and then the choir stuff that I was mentioning. Okay, guys, so I think that I will just start with this low lead right here. And I'm sorry if there are some weird cuts during this. I have to record this in separate sessions just because I don't have as much time anymore as I used to. So this is the first lead that comes in, and it sounds like this. And then we have a few different variations on the MIDI notes there. So like the next phrase is this. So if you'd like to know the notes, here are the notes for the first one. Second one looks like this. And I believe for the most part, they are the same throughout. I think this one is a little bit of a different variation on the first one. So I will take off the processing and we can go through this. All right, so to me, this patch sounded like a square wave from the start. So that is what I used. And I turned it up to 16 voices because it just didn't sound like it was one solitary square wave. So this is what it sounds like with just that square. And there's a few pitch bending things going on that I will go over as well. So I also ended up adding this other saw oscillator. And the reason for this is that it combines with the square really well when there's some distortion later on and kind of gives us just a closer sound to what deadmau5 had. So with that saw with 16 voices again, it sounds like this. So we're getting kind of a brighter character on there. I guess I will go over some of the modulation that's going on right here. So I have this LFO that's set at 2 bars, so pretty much this entire length, and it's affecting a sync on this saw wave. You'll see that affecting that oscillator. And then I'm also FMing from this B oscillator. So this LFO is affecting the amount of the FM. So that's just kind of giving us a little bit of a different character as the sound is moving. I would say that this song is effective because there are so many accents and just individual changes on every note, and that's what makes it feel more alive. So we have that LFO affecting the sync and the FM. Another thing that is going on is I'm using this envelope 2 to affect the level. So I have the attack pushed up, and I am actually automating that envelope 2. So some notes have a longer attack, some come quicker. So you can kind of hear that right here. So if I take off that automation, it just doesn't have the same accent quality on certain notes. Kind of adds some interesting variation. Some notes appear quicker than others. So it seemed like pretty much every patch in this song had some sort of pitch bending on it, some variation in the pitch slightly for each note. So I use this LFO 2 and I'm throwing it on the fine tuning of both of these oscillators. And then I set it to Hertz mode and off, and it's at a very slow LFO amount. So we're getting just slight pitch changes from note to note. So the next thing I did is I added some distortion. So with the distortion, it sounds like this. Without it, just some subtle high-end grit, I would say. And this is the curve that I used. And then I heard that there was some sort of phasing going on or some flanging. I think in deadmau5's recent songs, he's been using a lot of phasing, perhaps, to kind of mess up the high end a little bit. So I just added this just to add a little bit of movement and phasing in the high end. It's very subtle, but it does kind of add some character to it. The next thing that is on there is this filter, low pass 18 decibel per octave. And what this is doing is kind of making the sound darker. And then this envelope 3 is affecting how much of the brightness comes in. So I have a very slow attack on that. So with that engaged, it sounds like this. So we're getting that darker kind of more far away sound there. And the next thing, I added some reverb, some plate reverb to give it some space and throw it back in the mix, kind of make it feel a little bit larger. Okay, and then I'm using a compressor to kind of crunch that all together so we have a more uniform sound, which makes it easier to mix in later with everything else. So now with everything that we did, we have notes that are accented in certain parts. We have notes that are moving around in pitch, and there's a little bit of phasing and grit going on. And then this compressor is controlling it all together so we have one uniform sound. So the next thing I did is I added an amp on this. I just felt like a lot of the sounds in this song had kind of guitar amp quality to it. So I threw on this amp just on this blues mode, and it sounds like this. So we're getting some of that high end back, and it just feels like a more gritty kind of guitar sound. And then next, I'm EQing some of the lows out. I was trying to emphasize a certain kind of tone in the high end, and then I'm just dipping out some of that very high end. And then what I'm doing after that, with this Pro Q3, I was trying to do some dynamic EQ to just control the fundamental. And that was to try and mix it in with everything later going on. So you can't really hear it just by itself, but I think when the rest of the elements are playing in the mix, you can kind of hear it. So I can play it with it off and on. Just some slight control on that low end. The next thing that I added was this delay, and this is very important as well. deadmau5's patch had a pretty strong delay quality on it, and it was set to 4. So I just added that on there. And this is also important because what this delay is doing is changing the pitch of the delayed hits slightly. So the way I did that is I threw this time percentage up, and I messed with the rate. So this is actually adjusting the time of the delay. And because this delay is set at repitch, that means the delay hits are actually going to be repitched a little bit. So if I turn that all the way off and play it, and then turn it back on, just another little interesting thing that deadmau5 did in this song. So one last thing that I forgot to mention on this patch is the portamento. So I have this glide set up to always at 106 milliseconds, and I push this curve up so the glide in between notes is a little bit quicker. But yeah, that is it for the low lead. I think the next thing we could go over is that second lead that comes in, and that sounds like this. This is the one that I don't feel like I got really that dead on. It's a very kind of strange sound, and I couldn't really get the correct wavetables to kind of figure it out. But I will turn off the processing again, and then we can go through it. So first of all, the MIDI notes of this are following the same notes as the low lead. So what I did is I searched through a few different wavetables. I started with a saw. It just didn't really feel like the right kind of character. deadmau5's kind of had this grouping of harmonics in this like 2 to 3K range. I was trying to figure that out, kind of get something close to that. So I arrived at this Digicook 2 wavetable, and I'm actually bending it a bit. I threw up the voices to 4, detune around 0.14, and that sounds like this. So it kind of gives us that buzzy character in the high end. And this one also has that portamento, but it's a little bit stronger. And I have some automation going on with that. I will get to that later. So this one also has some pitch changing going on. It's kind of a more intense vibrato for this one. So I'm using LFO2, 7.4 hertz, and I threw it on the fine pitch of that. I was trying to get even closer, so I added another oscillator, Digicook 3 for this one. I pushed it up to 7 voices, detune around 0.05, and then I'm FMing from A, so it's kind of giving us a more gritty high character, I would say. So those two oscillators sound like this. Kind of a strange wavetable there. It's also an octave higher than the first oscillator. So I also heard that there was some kind of noise, like some white noise in the high end with this one. So I added this Air Can 2, and I have this going directly out. And then I just played with the level and the pitch to kind of find the right space for it. So yeah, that LFO2 is also on that second oscillator, affecting the fine tuning. And I will go to the FX tab first before I go into the automation that's going on. So I threw on some tube distortion just to gritty it up a little bit more. And then I'm using a phaser again. So this is being pushed into the high end. So I push the frequency up. The depth is turned down. The reason for that is it kind of keeps it in that frequency range. It's not going all over the place. And then the feedback I turned down so it's not super sharp, but we're still getting a little bit of phasing there. So that sounds like this. Yeah, so next I had this filter on just to kind of attenuate the very high end of this. It's not really doing too much. And then again, I'm using plate reverb to give it some brightness and space. Not really brightness, but kind of a deeper chamber-like vibe to it. So yeah, I guess I will go into this processing here and then we can talk about the automation. So I threw on some OTT just to kind of crunch it together, make it feel more uniform. So we're getting a lot more mid information there. I threw up that mid knob a bit, turned the high down a little bit as well. And then this EQ is affecting, and then this EQ is just taking out some of that low noise rumble that we have there. And then I was trying to find the right frequency range that deadmau5 has had. So I guess that was kind of around that 3K range. And then I'm just taking out maybe that very high end there. So the next thing I did is just add a delay. I think this one was at 3. So threw that on. Again, I'm pushing the time up on this. So we're getting some of those pitch changes in the delayed hits. To talk about the automation, I have a few things going on here. So I'm automating the glide time, and that's mainly for this last hit right here, because I was trying to accent this note in a specific way. The other thing I am doing is automating this macro. So what this macro is doing is engaging this LFO, which is on the coarse pitch of each oscillator. So when this macro is up higher, this LFO is actually engaged. So in the matrix tab, I threw on the macro, which is affecting the coarse pitch. So I'm automating that macro up for specific notes. So that's giving us even more pitch bending at the start of each note. So we're getting kind of a swoop up. It's more of an accent on each note. So again, in this song, I was trying to match what deadmau5 did, and it sounded like he had a lot of accents on all of these notes. So if I turn that macro all the way off, this is what it sounds like. So you're hearing all of that glide there, but the notes kind of sound the exact same. So if I turn that macro back on, this is what it sounds like. So like these two notes here, we're not getting that pitch bend at the very start, but then the rest of the notes, we get more of an accented start to each note. And I needed to duplicate that all the way down here, but you get the idea. So yes, I think that is that second lead. So if I play that with the first one that we created, it sounds like this. Those are the two main leads in the beat section in the intro. The next thing I guess we could go over is this synth stab kind of brass hit that comes in. So it sounds like this. A very powerful brass sound. So I'll take the processing off again for this. Okay, so I started with a saw wave for this. So with just a saw, it sounds like this. And I used this envelope 1 shape to affect how it tails off at the end. So we kind of get that initial hit, then it kind of drifts off. There's a little bit of release on there, but I threw this up to 9 voices because it sounded like a kind of super saw brass sound. So with that engaged, it sounds like this. So I have the detune kind of high up at 0.15. It sounded like there needed to be another more direct saw in the middle. So I added that Just gives us a more powerful sound, I think. And then I'm doing a slight amount of FMing from B, just to kind of give us a little bit of a different character in the high end, but it's not really doing too much. And then I have this LFO on the fine tuning again, and this is going very slowly. So we're getting this kind of lazy pitching sound to the bass. So the next thing I wanted to do is dirty this up a little bit. So I threw on some tube distortion. And I also wanted to try that flanger again, just to give us a little bit of a different quality. It sounded like deadmau5's had some phasing going on, so I tried to recreate that. And then this filter is just kind of taking those highs out, so it's a little darker. And I think I have an envelope on there as well. Yeah, so this envelope 2 is giving us that bright hit at the start, and then it tails off. And I also realized that this envelope 3 is also affecting the FM amount. So again, the next thing I did is add a compressor to control it all together, make it easier to mix in after the fact. So I also threw on the amp on this one. It just sounded like it needed to be more of a guitar kind of distorted sound. So I used the bass setting on this actually. So with that on, it sounds like this. And then this EQ is just taking out some of the lows, trying to emphasize this very specific tonality that deadmau5 had. So that was around the like 1.5K range. And then I took this 5th node just to start cutting off those highs. And then this last EQ node is just cutting off those highs altogether. So with the EQ on, it sounds like this. So now we have a little bit more room for the bass and the lows of this lead here. And then I try to throw in some max bass to give us a little bit of a thicker sound. I think it kind of added to the quality of the brass hit. And then this utility, I'm just using it to bring it more into the center. And then this reverb is to give it the space it needs to kind of ring out. And then this delay is set at 4. Not super strong, but I threw it on there after the fact, so the hit kind of drifts off a little slower. And I threw the percentage up on this right side just to make it a little bit more wide. And then I threw a final compressor on there, so it's emphasizing the tail of the hit even more. And then this limiter is just pushing it up, cutting off the very tops of it. So now we have our brass hit. So if I play that with the other leads that we have, it sounds like this. So now we're starting to build up the synth section of this song. Okay, so we have these synth parts now, so let's move on to the bass. So the bass of this song is broken up into 2 different sounds. We have this bass pluck here, and then these stabs. And these are both hitting at an F note. So we can go over this 16th bass pattern right here. So I started with a saw wave and it sounds like this. And then I threw that up to 7 voices to give us some width and give us more of a Reese kind of bass. And another interesting thing that I'm doing here, which is something I heard in the original, it may not actually be there, but what I did is I threw this LFO on the chorus pitch. So as the 16th notes are running along, we get this kind of pitching up and down. Then I threw another saw oscillator on there, just 1 voice and an octave higher. And the next thing I did is I sent both of those oscillators into this filter. I used the 24 decibel per octave filter. And I am modulating that with this envelope 2. So it's on the cutoff, but as well as the resonance. So that sounds like this. And I felt like I needed some stronger bass in there. So I added this sub oscillator, a triangle wave, also going into this filter. And then for the effects, just some tube distortion and then some compression to control it and kind of emphasize that pluck sound. So the attack is fairly fast, release around 50 in a kind of sharp ratio. So that is that patch. Pretty simple. And then I just did some EQ when I was mixing. I took out some of that kind of low mid area, kind of emphasized some of that 1K so we can hear it in the high end a bit. The next thing to go over would be these bass stabs. So I will take out the processing for this. Okay, so to me, this sound in deadmau5's track sounded like some sort of crazy FM sound. So I went through a few wavetables just to try and find the right kind of character of that growly, aggressive impact sound. So I arrived at Digicook 3 for the main oscillator, and then just this virus wavetable. So what I'm doing is kind of creating this like Reese sound with this oscillator, 7 voices, detune around 0.03. Just use some bend to get the right kind of timbre in it. And then this virus wavetable is being FM'd from A. So if I play that, it sounds like this. And then I also threw on some bright white noise. So now we're getting this more kind of aggressive high-end sound. So the next thing I did is I threw on some more distortion to make it even more filthy. I used the X shaper, and then I'm throwing it into this filter after the fact with this envelope 2, automating the cutoff, and then this macro automating the cutoff as well. And I will go into what the macro is doing, but it sounds like this. And then this compressor is doing the similar thing as the first bass patch. It's just controlling it, kind of emphasizing the attacks of each hit. So I'm doing a few different things in this matrix tab. It sounded like this bass stab in deadmau5's track had a lot of randomness to it. There's a lot of different bouncing around in the stereo field and intensity in the high end. So I tried to recreate that with this note on random, threw it on this filter frequency, so get a random cutoff change for each note. And then I threw some more on the resonance, so we're getting a different kind of character as well. And then I threw it on the pan of each oscillator. And then I'm also throwing some velocity on the filter frequency amount. So in the Midi tab, I have some different velocities going on for these different hits. So the lower velocities, the filter is more closed, and the higher velocities, it's more open. So all of those things combine to give us some randomness, some more bouncing around, and some different qualities in the filter cutoff amounts. So I think what I had done is I was trying to use this macro to affect the notes individually, but then what I did after the fact was just use this note on random. So with all those things turned on, it sounds like this. And then I went ahead and I EQ'd it, took some of the lows out and try to emphasize that bite of the sound. Then what I did is I threw on some reverb, a shorter time and not too much, but just to give it some space. So every time it hits, we get this kind of splashing of reverb. And then this delay is bouncing it around. I threw that percentage up again in the time. So we're getting some different pitching in the delayed hits as well. And then finally, what I did is I used this MSED plugin, which is a free plugin from Voxengo. And I just turned down the mid channel a bit, so it's more of a side sound. But that is pretty much it. So those two basses together and we get our bass section. And then if we combine that with our other instruments, it sounds like this. So that is our instrument section for the intro. And I can go over the drums in this track a little bit as well. I just sampled the kick from the original just to give me a better foundation. And then we have these hats that are bouncing around and building up as the track progresses. So we have some 16th note hats, and then some more hats that have a brighter quality to them. And then we just have a regular offbeat hat. And I believe I threw some swing on this. Yeah, so this swing 1645. So the hi-hats have a little bit of groove to them. So you can hear that with the kick when I play them together. And then we just have these occasional snare hits that come in. I just combined a clap and a snare and just reverbed it out, saturated it a little bit, and then just some effects that are going on to build things up and transition into the other sections. So those drums together sound like this. And then if we play it all together, and that is that intro section pretty much. I just have this LFO tool on the instrument section, and this Pro Q3, I'm kind of using it as a multi-band compressor just to squeeze some different areas together so it's more controlled and more mixed together. Okay, so now that we have that little intro section down, we can move on to the break. So this is my favorite part of the track, where you get those classic deadmau5 chords that build up into something really gorgeous and beautiful. So I guess we will start with the chords first, and they sound like this. So the bass MIDI looks like this. We have these secondary notes that come in to kind of create those passing chords that come in. And then we have these top notes that combine with those bass notes. So I will go over the top notes first. So to me, this just sounded like a straight saw wave, just a classic deadmau5 one voice saw. So that's what I used. And then what I heard in this was, again, some phasing in that high end. So I threw on the phaser. Again, the depth is a little bit down. Frequency is higher. So we're focusing on those upper frequencies. And then I am automating the filter cutoff amount. So I have that moving up as the progression builds. And each of these nodes I felt like was a key kind of accent moment for this progression. So right here kind of builds up to combine with the lead right here. And the way I kind of like to think about this as I've been doing these videos is that In every song, there's going to be these like quantum leaps of energy into the next section or into a new mood or something like that. So I think it's helpful when you're thinking about mixing is thinking about where are these quantum leaps? Like where are we moving into a new space? So I felt like right here was one, and you could find others like in the leads where those notes are accented. What I learned from this track is that accenting notes and accenting moments is incredibly crucial to actually creating music. So we have that building up with the filter, and then I just pushed the high end a bit with the EQ, and then I'm compressing it a bit just to control it. And then I added some further high end boosts, and then I think I'm limiting it just a touch. Looks like it's not really touching. That was probably left over when I was doing these chords all in one patch. And then another thing to add was this delay. So I have it set on 4 and I pushed it a little bit forward on each side. What this also does is create some more phasing, and then it's also sending it to the left and right. So that is the high patch. The bass patch is very similar, except for the bass, I actually used 2 voices, but the detune is at 0. So they're very close together. And then I'm distorting the bass, and I'm using a filter in a similar way where I'm building it up, trying to match the moment of the upper patch. And then I threw on this max bass, and I feel like this does a huge amount to this sound. So if I play it without the max bass, and then with it on, it just feels so much more powerful, and we're actually getting a stronger sub. It really creates a strong foundation in the low end. I know deadmau5 uses this a lot, and it's very effective for making your low end actually thick and solid. And then just some delay on that as well. And I use this EQ to boost some of the sub region. And then I have both of these patches going into a group. And on the group, I am doing some more multi-band compression type things just to squish it together and make it feel like one patch. And then I'm doing some more phasing over the top. So both patches are getting phased together. It just makes it feel like the top end is a little bit more alive, I think. And then this EQ is just automating kind of a high pass filter, which leads into the actual drop of the song. But those are the chords. It's pretty simple. It's just some saw waves and then trying some things out with phasers and then building it up with a filter. So the next thing to go over would be the choir. And like I said earlier, I just used an Ableton choir for this. So I just found that this Fairness choir sounded the most similar to what deadmau5 had. Still pretty far off, but it worked for this video at least. And then I am just cutting off those lows, and I'm actually layering it with some other choirs. So this one is actually one I made myself. It's just a single note, sustained note of a vocal. And then I'm looping it. I threw this little altar boy on it, and I threw the format a little bit lower. So we're getting a lower quality in the voice. And then again, I am EQing out some of the lows and some of this high end. So if I combine that with the other choir, over the top, I have this airy high-end sizzle thing going on. So I use this kind of strange saw wave, and it's pretty quiet. So we're just getting a touch of those harmonics. I threw another vocal sample into the noise oscillator. So we're just getting those high-end breath sounds. So what that does is give us this kind of canopy of high noise over the top. And it seems that many producers do this. They throw some high noise over the top. I know Artie has done it. Porter does it all the time. It's just a very nice way to kind of cap off your mix, having some high-end sparkle going on. So if I play the choir with the chords, it sounds like this. So that is the meat of the break section. The last thing to go over would be this lead that comes in. And this is a lead that has a ton of accents on it. I think that's what makes it so interesting. So we will go over that next. So this lead sound is very similar to the first sound that we created, but it is an octave higher and it has more distinguished accents to it, I would say. So it sounds like this. So I will take off the processing. So like the first sound, I had a square wave with a saw wave. And for this one, I pushed it up to 16 voices for each. And like the first one as well, I'm using this LFO to affect the sync amount on this saw oscillator and then the FM amount on the square oscillator. This LFO2 is affecting the fine pitch of both. It's set at 0.8 hertz, so pretty slow moving. And then I also have this LFO4 doing a similar sort of pitch thing on the coarse pitch, and that is being controlled by the macro. So that will be used for automation in the future. So with just those things, it sounds like this. And then I have that portamento on with the curve pushed up a little bit as well. So I threw on some more X shaper to distort it. And then I'm using a flanger and a phaser to add some more of that high-end phasing. And then this filter is cutting off some of those highs, and this cutoff is being automated as well. And then I have some plate reverb and a compressor to control it all and make it sound like one uniform sound. So I will go through these processing elements and then we can talk about the accents and the automation. So I threw an amp on there. So like the others, it's a little bit more dirty now. And then I'm using this EQ to cut out that low noise distortion and then to emphasize some of this high end. And then I threw a delay on, set to 4 as well, and pretty strong feedback there. So that sounds like this. So there are a few things going on in regard to accenting these notes in a different way. First of all, we have the filter, which is allowing some of the high end to come in. So it starts fairly low, and then as the progression builds, we get a little bit more high end. The second thing to note would be this macro. So again, I have this macro turned on for certain notes, a little bit up there, and then more on some other notes, and at the very end, even more. So what that is doing is activating this LFO4, and this envelope shape is set on the coarse pitch of both oscillators. So we're getting a stronger pitch bend on these notes. So in effect, we're getting a stronger accent at the start of each of these notes where the macro is engaged. And then the next thing to note would be just this portamento. Like the second lead that we went over, I just have this turned off on this final note. And that's so instead of getting a glide down from this note to this note, we're just getting this sharp rise in pitch at the start of this note. So that sounds like this. So we're getting that. And then I am also automating this envelope to attack. So for different notes, we have a longer attack or a shorter attack. So that will determine how instantaneously the note is played. So that's a further way to accent these notes and give them more character and personality. So those are all the automation things going on. So if I put all of these envelopes into one window, you can see how much is going on to accent each of these notes. And this is what makes it come alive and not feel like just a standard Serum patch that has some glide to it. So again, here's what that sounds like. And at the very end here, we have an instance of that earlier lead that we created just as a layer for this part. And that coincides with this little impact here. So if I play those together. And you can see on this one that we have that similar portamento change, which is allowing this last note to be accented differently. So that is that last patch, and that brings us to pretty much all of the synths that I created for this. So I will just play this break section one more time, and then that will be about it for this. So thank you guys so much for watching. I know that this was a super long video, but I just wanted to get everything in that I could. I hope there were some techniques and some theories that you could incorporate into your own sounds and music. Thank you guys for watching. This project will be uploaded to the Patreon real soon. And I just want to give a big thank you to all of the people that have joined so far. And have been supporting me. It really means a lot. But I have some other videos in the works, and I will keep you guys posted. Check out the Discord if you'd like to join and talk to us about sound design and everything else. But thanks again for watching, everyone, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.